There is not a liberal America and a conservative America. There is the United States of America.
A new vision will govern our land.
Our job is not to divide. Our job is to bring people together.
By the people, for the people, and of the people.
Our youth has power.
Border Talks is a video podcast by students in the TAMIU Political Science Association, dedicated to exploring the political impact of ever-changing current events. With an understanding that even the most personal matters can be political, we aim to explore how issues ranging from the most seemingly insignificant, absurd, or serious subject matters can affect our border town through a nonpartisan, student-focused perspective. So hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Border Talks. My name is Cecy and I'm your host, and I'm a TAMIU student majoring in political science and sociology, and I'm joined here by my fellow PSA members. So if y'all could just introduce yourselves real quick.
I'll go first. Hi guys, my name is Jessica Rodriguez. I'm a senior at TAMIU and I am a communications major, and I have a concentration in media production, and I am a PSA member since spring of 2020, yeah.
My name's Alex Hernandez. I'm a senior at TAMIU. I'm a political science major, and I'm with PSA also.
I'm Uriel Flores, majoring in criminal justice with a minor in psychology, and I'm also a PSA member.
So on today's episode of Border Talks, we will be talking about, unfortunately, one of the latest tragedies of an American soldier, Vanessa Guillen, and we'll also be touching on how foreign students, the new challenges foreign students have been facing this academic year or could face amidst ICE's new guidelines. So just to start off, I want to give a brief description of Vanessa Guillen, her story, and so we can go from there. So Vanessa Guillen, as most know, she was a 20-year-old Hispanic soldier, and she was based in Fort Hood, Texas. Vanessa, according to her family, always wanted to serve her country, but things took a turn for the worst when she explained to her family that she was being sexually harassed. She was working with Aaron David Robinson, who was also 20, in the arms building near one another, and he was amongst the last people to see her alive before she disappeared on April 22nd. The family was demanding more answers and looking for justice, and eventually the process was really slow and there was nothing really done. So it wasn't until late June that Vanessa's remains were found, and unfortunately she was bludgeoned to death, burned, and then encased in cement to hide her body. So Robinson was found guilty of the crime after his accomplice, Cecy Aguilar, admitted to helping Robinson dispose of the body, and he eventually also committed suicide. So a lot of unfortunate things that are happening, and a lot to unpack. Obviously terrible to hear. So I wanted to ask you guys, we're all, as we mentioned, students in different things. For me, like sociology is one of the big things that I think about when looking at things like this. And Uriel, you are studying criminal justice, Jessica, communications, Alex, political science. And I guess just based on your personal experiences and also like what it is that you're majoring in, how do you feel that we were led to this situation? And what do you think could be done to prevent situations like this? Whoever can go first.
Okay, well, I'll go first. Okay, so I'm a communications major, so I really don't have a lot of experience with the military or anything that's related to it, but I do come from a family that has been in the military, one of them being my dad. And so I think one of the things that led up to this and could have been prevented is the way that we see how men treat women, or maybe just not men treating women in a certain way, but about like consent and how people don't respect that. So I know like a lot of people will say like, oh, you need to tell your daughters to be careful. But it's like, we shouldn't be telling our daughters to be careful. We should be telling like our sons, like, you need to respect people, or vice versa. You need to tell your daughters, respect people, right? So I think the military is like a world for men. And it's kind of like that saying, boys will be boys. So there isn't much accountability on people who are guilty, you know? So it's like, I feel like it's the culture from which that we create problems here in the United States. It's like men are strong, they're supposed to keep things in, and they're not supposed to like retaliate on each other. Like men have like a strong bond. So if something is happening and they're doing something wrong, there's less of a chance of people reporting it or like their friends asking them to take accountability. So for me, it's kind of like the culture in which we're born into. So a lot of women are scared entering into the military. I know when I was smaller, my dad would always like urge me to join the military because he was a proud veteran. But for me, I always kind of saw it as like a men's world, and like I didn't fit in. So I kind of like feared going into like this place where I would be labeled as like second best. And I didn't want myself to be like in danger or just be like harassed. And sometimes I feel like women can be like used as like gratification or like sexual objects while people are in the military. And I feel like sometimes men can take advantage of that, and the fact that women are like taught to be silent in these type of situations that cause a lot of problems. So for me, it's very like fear-inducing to go into like a world where men dominate and men rule. So I guess that's like my point of view on it, or at least like my experience with it.
I can go next. I want to second your point of like lack of accountability.
Mm-hmm.
So I was getting more in depth into like what actually happened and the day the crime was committed. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, because the screen froze. Okay, it's good.
No, you're fine.
So Vanessa Guillen was being sexually harassed, and it's pretty obvious at this point that we know it was being caused by Robinson. And one of the reasons that she was murdered is that it's speculated with her family lawyer that on the day that she was killed, that she was threatening Robinson to file a case like against them. At the same time, Robinson was dating Cecy, which was the accomplice, and she's married to another military man.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have that in the military, you're actually not allowed to do that. So it seems that Vanessa Guillen, it's speculated by the family lawyer that she probably used that also to kind of gain leverage on him. And that's when he snapped and he grabbed the hammer and he beat her and killed her. And I think the lack of accountability comes in because, first of all, no one was there in the area to see what happened. He left and he came back to get the body. And between those hours, no one went in, no one saw anything. No one saw like all this blood on the floor. No one saw her body. When she didn't come back for like 2 or 3 hours, I mean, it took them that long to realize that she was gone and that she wasn't anywhere to be found. They didn't link that a hammer was missing and a soldier was missing. It just seemed like they just kind of went over their head. So I think there's a lot of lack of accountability of like putting pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
They had Robinson in the room with them. They didn't want him to leave because they knew that he perhaps had done something wrong. But yeah, Robinson was still able to escape somehow. And he got a gun as well, which is what he used to kill himself. So in a 2-hour gap, he escaped on foot from the base. He got a gun from somewhere. And before he was caught, he was able to like kill himself. So there's a lot of weird little details that just show like it was mishandled very poorly. Or was handled very poorly, it was mishandled. And I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I think it's kind of a failure of not paying attention to people who need the help. I think if someone had like approached to Vanessa and taken her seriously or had actually investigated earlier, this call could have been avoided much sooner.
True. Very true.
Right. And Uriel, did you have anything that maybe you could add, like just from like what you maybe personally think caused this, or just maybe as like your experience and like what you've learned as a student of criminal justice? I'm interested in knowing what you think happened, like where maybe they went wrong, and maybe potentially how things like that could be fixed.
Well, I personally believe that the chain of command is incorrect, like of reporting your sexual assault to someone in the military. I feel that having someone to be there present with you when reporting your sexual assault will help prevent these types of scenarios in the near future, and advocating for new laws to be strong and for them to actually advocate for sexually assault uh, individuals.
Right. I mean, I agree. I think for me, I try to think about this like through like a thinking about it like through a political perspective, but also like a sociological perspective. I think like first of all, like even assuming that some type of policy is in place, which as we're slowly being made aware, there's not. But even with like a potential of that policy being set in place, I think I very much agree with what Uriel said in that I think that these aren't sexual assault isn't something that people should have to report to the same people that could potentially be doing it. Like if someone is even like, I don't think it should be something that's internal. It should definitely be like an external like committee or something of that sort. I'm not too familiar with exactly how it works in reporting, but I have been reading that it's all like internal, and so I think there should be a separate committee so that people can deal with it. And then just from like a sociological perspective, I think about all of this, and to me it's very clear that it's a systemic issue. This isn't only a problem that we see in the military. There's also historical violence from, unfortunately, police and border patrol and even ICE that have been historical violence against women that isn't reported, and even when it is reported, it isn't treated correctly because there's a systemic issue, and as Alex mentioned and Jessica mentioned, an issue with accountability is, I think, the biggest problem that we're looking at here. And so given this and the outrage that it's caused, thousands of people all over the country have been protesting in Vanessa's name, and the hashtag I am Vanessa Guillen has become popular and given a path for former overwhelmingly women who are soldiers to speak up about their experience with sexual harassment and rape during their time serving the country. And based on what like I've read and all of those things, a lot of the issues that they're mentioning is the same thing: a lack of accountability and especially a fear of retaliation. And so all of that, of course, is very unfortunate. And I think the reason that we even wanted to talk about this at PSA is to think about how do we go about fixing this. And so President Trump is planning to meet with the family of Vanessa Guillen, but the family is planning a protest in Washington, D.C. on July 30th for a bill to be passed. And so the bill that is being attempted to be passed on July 30th is the Military Justice Improvement Act, and it is a bill sponsored by Senator Kirsten Gillibrand. And the bill would essentially make it possible for those who are being sexually assaulted or harassed in the military to be able to report to an independent source instead of the chain of command, as we mentioned. So before we get into how these protests and this the response to Vanessa Guillen's tragedy has looked locally. I just wanted to ask you guys about the bill and if you think that maybe that's a step in the right direction, and maybe what other things would you like to see or would you think would be a good idea besides just passing this bill? And
So
you could go in the same one.
I think it's a good idea. When you said that there should be like a committee that's apart from the institutions themselves, is a good idea. I think a lot of the problem that stems from it is because these are like internal affairs. So they work within the same institution that's causing the problems in the first place. It's the same thing that happened, like they have the same thing in the military, they have the same thing in the police, and we know how that sometimes works out. Border Patrol barely has an internal affairs, like the smallest one out of all the law enforcement. So I think you're able to take that job away from them, and not necessarily take the job away, but like maybe outsource it to someone who can be less biased. They can increase like actually studying cases and helping the people that need the help.
For sure. I think, like, for me, I think it's a really good bill because I know for women or also men, like they might have a hard time coming out like to like their sergeants or like the higher commands in the military. I know it can be like a very embarrassing thing to admit that like you have gone through sexual assault. So the fact that they can like outsource like somebody else like who is not in the military is like very helpful because it can be like anonymous, it can be private, and it'll make sure that like whoever is at fault will be like prosecuted. And when that happens, like you're less likely to have a person trying to cover it up, especially like let's say if there's like a I don't know the military rankings or anything, but like let's say like you go to like a sergeant or a, I don't know. Well,
Just high ranking.
yeah, like a higher ranking person, like if you tell them like, oh, this person did something to me, but they already have like a bias and like they're like, no way, he could have never have done that. Like there's already like barriers in getting like justice for that victim. So I agree with Alex. It's better to have people who are unbiased and don't know these people at all because it'll ensure that like these people get justice. And I think it'll be very beneficial if that bill is passed.
Mm-hmm.
I also agree with Jessica and with Alex. I mean, it will prevent those loopholes from preventing more crimes in the military, as well maybe adding like a hotline for victims to report anonymously or to like have like a double testimony. It would probably help in the near future.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I think that would be really good. I was watching a video by PBS NewsHour, and they had two different guests on there. One of them was a former lieutenant colonel, and the other one a former army captain. And like Jessica, I'm not like particularly familiar with like the rankings or how they really work. But both of them were, even though they had disagreements on how it is that they could solve some of the issues, ultimately they all did agree that it is an issue that they see. And even the Secretary of Defense recently spoke about how it is imperative that everyone is protected against sexual assault. And so I think for me, I agree. I think that like legislation like this military justice improvement act, I think it would definitely help. And similar to Jessica, I think this is also like not just something that we can fix through legislation. You mentioned how there's a culture of like this is like a boys club, a man's club. And I don't remember the name, but there was even a woman who was posting about like, wow, like, are you serious? This is ridiculous. Sexual assault is essentially like a ticket into to getting into the military. And I think that obviously that the maybe it is, and hopefully it's not, but based on what we're seeing, it seems like a lot of women do experience this, and that shouldn't be the case. I think that if a woman, or anyone for that matter, is going to put themselves into the position where they could potentially die for their country, the last thing that they should be worried about is whether or not the person that they're supposed to be fighting with and alongside and is supposed to be their ally, whether or not they're also going to hurt them. And I think, of course, it's so unfortunate and even enraging to think that Vanessa had to go through this, but not just Vanessa. There's a lot of Vanessa Guillens. It's unfortunately not the only story, and there's a lot of stories that look like it. It's just that a lot of women have came out alive from those experiences. And going back to the PBS NewsHour story, they did mention that they feel that a big problem is what we've all talked about, which is that they should not have to report to people in that chain of command, especially if we're looking at a culture, like a cultural problem within the military. And then to think on top of that, you have to report to a chain of command. It's already hard enough for people outside of the military to report sexual assault, even to their parents or their loved ones. To now on top of that have to do it against someone who's supposed to be your like higher ranking officer or like someone you look up to, I think it's really scary. And I think that's why I said I think it's a systemic issue. I think this bill would definitely help, but I think there's a lot more to be done within all of these systems, not just the military, but like Alex mentioned, also the police. I think also like Border Patrol and ICE. We have to set pathways to hold our officials and the people who are supposed to be protecting us and doing good things to be able to be held accountable. Because ultimately, like if we're only holding like people who are doing nonviolent like petty street crimes accountable versus like the people who are supposed to be protecting us, then you know there's not, that doesn't seem fair, that doesn't seem like justice. But I guess now going into how that's manifested locally and how it looks like here on the border, this Vanessa Guillen case, in response to Vanessa's murder, some Laredo citizens have paid tribute to her by creating a mural, and there was a memorial motorcycle procession on July 12th. The event was organized by Mujeres Poderosas from the LULAC Council number 12, and according to KGNS, hundreds of supporters, including Mayor Pete Saenz, Congressman Henry Cuellar, and County Commissioner Cindy Liendo, made it out to the event. So the rally was at the Laredo Harley-Davidson, and it ended with a mural in downtown Laredo. So I wanted to ask you guys what you thought about this showing, what you felt like maybe like the message was, or like if you think there was just, I guess, your opinions on it.
I think it was a very nice thing for Laredo to do because everyone was kind of united with the cause, and the fact that Vanessa is Hispanic, it resonated with all of us. And I think it was to show that like, although like you may not come from like a military family or you know someone who is in the military, this could have been like your daughter, this could have been like your hija, this could have been your mom, or this could have been your tia, this could have been your cousin. And the fact that like this happened to her, I think it woke up a lot of people here in Laredo, a lot of Hispanics, to like how our community can be affected by violence, and like even having this like dream of like the American dream, serving your country, protecting people, like living your best American life, it can still kill you in the end. And I feel like it was nice to see how like Laredo like united and they made that role for her. I think it sparked a good conversation in our community. So I think it was overall like positive.
In my case, I have a sister that's a veteran. She went to the Army. I have a close friend who has two sisters that went to the Army. So, I mean, this could have easily been like my sister or his sisters or any other family in Laredo that has like female siblings that have gone to the military. And it's heartbreaking, but it's good to see that at least people in Laredo are listening and they hear the message, they're connecting to it. Our officials are actually saying something about it. I'm happy to hear that they're making an effort. Aside from that, I know that they also made like a mural, which is nice of them to also do I mean, I wish I could see more of this from the city, but I'm glad that they did it for this one because she really deserves it. To have the attention on her.
In my perspective, like I feel that the event was hosted like to prevent more accidents of this happening in the military and as well to help the community grieve over the loss of Vanessa Guillen. Since she was Hispanic, it affected everybody in the community.
Right. I think it definitely helped the community. Like it was definitely like an act of solidarity. And I very much agree with what Jess said in terms of how it really resonated with our community because we're overwhelmingly Hispanic, Latinx. And so we see her and a lot of us think like, yeah, OMG, like that could have been me. That could have been like my cousin. That could have been my daughter. All of those things. So for me, I think that it was a nice gesture. However, I do think that as far as like politically speaking, I would like to see more support for, I don't think that they, like Congressman was talking about how they're gonna bring that up in Congress. However, like I do think that it's important for the community and for them to further spread awareness on how we can specifically address issues like these with like our, not only like in the military, but like using laws, how we can address these things. And so we think about pretty recently we saw the issue with violence from the Border Patrol officer who was murdering women. And so I think it's not only like overall it's not just something, unfortunately it's not just a problem in the military, it's a problem in a lot of like our like justice systems, or what's supposed to be like people who enforce justice. I think we blindly think that everyone who signs up to enforce justice is going to do that with a good heart, and clearly that's not the case. And so I think this was a nice event to see, but I think it's important to also address the ugly and also address like how do we fix this, not just in the military but in other places. And besides this event, which I was surprised to see even happen, given that technically we're not like supposed to have any events after like all of this COVID thing. I assume it was approved by like the mayor and stuff, obviously, since he was there, which again is good. But I did see that another organization which got the ball rolling with the Black Lives Matter movement here locally, which is Red Wing, they did make a Zoom presentation about Vanessa Guillen. And what I think is important to note from their presentation, and a big difference between their presentation and also the city's protest, or maybe not protest, but their presentation, is that they specifically go into similar cases that not only involve the military, but also Border Patrol and also police. And some of the people that they mentioned is the death of Lavina Johnson, who was a 19-year-old who was also murdered in the military. Army Specialist Morgan Macbeth, who also died in a non-combat related death in Iraq, which is, again, all of this is like violence against women that happened in the military. They also mentioned Soteria Brown, Tina Priest, Amy Tirador, Stacy Dryden, and all of these women in their 20s, which is, you know, a lot of young women. And so an important thing that I think they did specifically for like Laredo and the community in that presentation is to go into those ugly details. And I think that was interesting to see. So it's interesting to see like the two ways that our community has responded, which is one, like a more like remembering Vanessa and honoring her, but I think like both honored her in different ways. So like the Mujeres Poderosas LULAC Council honored her by saying that they're trying to change it. And I think Red Wing honored her by pointing out how this is not just a Vanessa problem. They very much point to a bigger issue. So given all of that, it's said that 40% of survivors have experienced some sort of retaliation from reporting their attackers. So of course, that's just more bad news to add on. So I think overall, we're all pretty much in a, maybe not in complete agreement, but can see that this is a big issue systemically, and that laws can help that, but we also have to take a look into those systems and see what can be done, regardless of whether or not you're a conservative or a liberal. We definitely, nobody wants to see sexual assault, especially not against women who are supposed to be serving our country, or by, you know, police and Border Patrol and ICE, who are supposed to also be helping and serving our country too in some way. So given all of that, and that we've been talking about how there is an issue with violence and attacks against communities by police and within the military, I think we've seen a lot of anti-Blackness and internalized racism manifest itself in that there's been a lot of people within our community who are critiquing, especially young people, for speaking out and for the Black Lives Matter movement, but a lot of them feeling that they're not giving the same energy to this Vanessa Guillen case. And so I wanted to ask you guys if you think that young people especially have been responding the same way to the Vanessa Guillen case, or if you've seen a difference, or also just like generally if maybe like you think that there has or hasn't been that difference, and why.
Good question.
Yeah.
I'm gonna think on that one.
Well, I personally think that there has been an impact like in all types of communities, especially in social media. There's been a lot of repostings of her story, and most individuals use social media.
Mm-hmm.
And there's been information regarding the case of Vanessa Guillen and bringing everybody together in unity to support her voice.
Do you think that there's been like a disparity between like do you think more people have been supporting like the Black Lives Matter movement versus the Vanessa Guillen movement? And if you do, why? If you don't, why? But the reason I'm asking this question is because we have seen like a lot of people that are critiquing, especially like I said, young people, claiming that there's a difference, and that, oh, like how can you stand up for Black Lives Matter but not like someone who could be you?
I think the difference, and this is just me talking and speculating, the thing that made the George Floyd Black Lives Matters like protest so big is that it was like a repetition of stuff that we had been seeing for many years before it. So they kept saying like, oh, this is like the feather that broke the camel's back, right? And in the case of Vanessa Guillen's case, this is one of the first ones that actually made like media. And I think it's like a lot of people take it seriously, but I think in case of the media, like it hasn't been shown enough. I've seen more posts like by people my age on Facebook or Twitter, and people making like support for her than I've seen on actual TV or from like professional media outlets.
Right, for sure.
I think George Floyd's like, yeah, it was like something that it was the last straw, and that's why it was such a huge movement, because people were just so tired of seeing this. Mm-hmm. And I think the Vanessa Guillen case, people are treating it like a freak accident or something that's like not a real like issue. Mm-hmm. And I think not until like we see more of these cases that come out of the spotlight and people are actually going to react in the same way that they reacted to the George Floyd case. That's my opinion.
Yeah, so I agree with Alex. I think why a lot of young people have been supporting Black Lives Matter is because I feel like we're all very aware of like these like repetitions of like how people in power will like abuse that. And I think although George Floyd is like the straw that broke the camel's back, I feel like we all have been feeling like this anxiousness and like this, like, how would I say it? Like this annoyance of how these people, like these older people who are supposed to be taking care of us, aren't listening to us. And so I feel like although George Floyd was Black, like we can all relate to this because like we're Hispanic people and we can like be killed for like our skin color. And I think maybe the reason why Vanessa hasn't been getting a lot of attention is because like in the military, just like the cases where people like feared retaliation, these stories aren't like brought to light as much. So I feel like in Laredo, people started reacting to it because it's like the first time they've heard of something like that happening so close to home. But I feel like there's been like a lot of fights of like, oh, well, this goes to show that like all lives matter, but it's not necessarily the case. It's like, we all need to open our eyes and see that like Black Lives Matter. And what we've been trying to get like the message like out is that like, it's these positions of power, these people who keep failing us, keep failing the people we love. So it's like, we need to like stand Black Lives Matter, and we need to call out like the system that failed Vanessa. They're related, they're not different. One's not more special than the other. Like Vanessa was like a product of like how this country failed her, and so was George Floyd. They're the same. Like I feel like people are just trying to nitpick and trying to like make one seem more important because they don't want to be left out of the conversation. But in reality, we are all supposed to be included in this conversation, and we should be demanding that like America can and should be doing better by this point. There's already too many deaths, not enough accountability. So yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's super disingenuous, and it's just meant to be divisive. Like I think
Yeah.
if no one brings that
For
argument,
sure.
they didn't even interact because there's no point to like actually feeding that.
Mhm.
You're not gonna win anything with it.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I kind of see it like as like you don't care until it happens to you, and like that feels like you never cared in the first place. Like you're only supporting something because of selfish reasons, not because like you actually cared about the well-being of people. It's not until like this Hispanic woman was killed that like now you care, and now you care that the system failed her, and now you want to tear down like Fort Hood. I stand with the family and saying that like they need to close down Fort Hood. They need to do like more investigations, and they need to bring people like into accountability. But I think like people need to see like the relation to that with like Black Lives Matter, because like we're calling for like the same like things. We want to say like, okay, this needs to be like examined. This needs to be like looked at again, because all these things are like pushing us down. All these things are like failing us. So when I hear like all lives matter and like oh, like Hispanic lives matter, like I kind of also just like turn away, because like we're all supposed to be in this together.
Sorry, your audio cut off.
You muted yourself.
Oh my God, my coaster fell on my keyboard, my bad.
Just literally like the last, so we're all supposed to be in this together. And
Yeah, like we're all supposed to be in this together. I don't know why people try to bring like this issue of like everyone matters, because like, yeah, like I don't know. I think it's kind of like, it makes people go in circles. I don't know.
Yeah, I think like for me, the biggest thing like I feel that has changed it is that it's a lot easier to record violence by police against like citizens or you know just people. It's a lot easier to record that versus like being in the military, and like the likelihood of anybody, you know, who's going to be recording sexual assault, and if they are, that's an even bigger issue, of course. But it's harder to record sexual assault because it's something that like happens in the dark, happens like people like find those little like holes to be able to do stuff like that. And then even like within the military itself, like I don't personally know like too much how it works, but I do like hear that like, oh, like they take away your phone and like all of these things. So it's a lot harder to like, first of all, it's hard to even keep in contact with your family, and second, like it's gonna be like a lot harder to record stuff like this. And given the history that we do have with like, even outside the military, like the history that we have with reporting sexual assault overall, like even with like college campuses and stuff, like reporting sexual assault isn't taken as seriously as it should be. And of course, within the military, which is this huge superpower, like and it's people that are higher ranking officials, like it's going to be even more difficult to call attention to it. And so I think that people want to be divisive and like at each other, like, oh, how can you be for Black Lives Matter, but you're not supporting like things about Vanessa Guillen. And it's like you said, Jess, it's not about I support Black Lives Matter and I don't support Vanessa Guillen. It's this is a problem in clear that we're seeing in all of our systems. And so this is a systemic issue, not only against Black lives, it's also against minorities, which includes women and includes Latinx people and includes even like LGBTQ plus people and all of those people. So I think that unfortunately anti-Blackness and internalized racism manifests itself with people saying like, why I'm supporting Vanessa Guillen, but like I don't support Black Lives Matter. And I think people who do say all lives matter, this is your opportunity. I think there's a misunderstanding with what Black Lives Matter is versus like all lives matter. But even not understand, like even if you don't understand like what those things mean, if you do, of course everyone thinks all lives matter, but they say Black Lives Matter because Black lives matter too. So this is our opportunity to truly prove that all lives matter, to do something against this, and to do something against all of these different all of this lack of accountability that we're seeing in all of our different like systems of government that are supposed to ultimately be there to protect us. So I think it's easy to point fingers and say like, oh, if y'all gave the same energy to Vanessa Guillen, this wouldn't have happened. And it, even though yes, that energy was needed for this attention for all of the attention to surround her, I think that all of this attention started surrounding her thanks to the Black Lives Matter movement and thanks to the fact that we had already been or that there had already been a huge movement of people critiquing one certain aspect of government. And so thanks to that like already being in the air, it was a lot easier for Vanessa to get the attention that she got, because like we mentioned, like, oh, it hasn't happened before. I think it specifically got the attention that it did now because of the fact that people are starting to wake up and see that we lack accountability.
It's tough to say what would have happened if like it wouldn't have been riding on like that wave.
Yes.
It's like what if, like there are other cases similar like this, and how come like we haven't even heard of them before?
Right, like I mentioned, all of those women that Red Wing talked about in their presentation, and I had never heard about all of those things. Why? Because it's hard to keep it accountable. It's hard to record it, which is, you know, if people see it, then it's a lot more likely to get attention. But I definitely think that thankfully Vanessa Guillen was able to spark this conversation. And I think that it's because thanks to the attention and like the buildup of a movement that we had already seen from the Black Lives Matter movement. But Uriel, I don't know if you have anything to add on like why you think, or if you think there's any differences, and yeah.
No, I don't have anything to add as of right now.
Okay, well, given that we are talking about all of these issues with government entities that are showing some form of violence, another thing that we've been seeing with like these past few weeks is the issue with ICE's new guidelines that would have potentially made it so that some of our international students would be forced out of the country and like forced to go on airplanes and all of these dangerous things, given that like we're in a literal pandemic. And so I wanted to ask you guys just like what you think about it. Thankfully, the Trump administration already rescinded this guideline, but we wanted to address it because we want to stand in solidarity with our international students and to let them know that, of course, like, y'all are like, you're part of our community, and this is something that we would never, like, we don't want you guys to be negatively affected. So yeah, we just want to hear, or I want to hear, like, what you guys think about this. If you think it's like a form of potential violence from a government entity, why potentially this could have happened, just opinions.
Well, I actually got like some feedback from some students on the matter. I have around like 2 to 3 students who wanted to share like a couple of their thoughts. So from this student, they wanted to remain anonymous. They said, our international students come to our country to explore and continue doing great on their education. ICE, not taking in mind that these students have paid for classes and dorms already, and saying that there might be a possibility of being kicked out and possibly not getting their money back, is truly disgusting, because I'm sure half of those officers went abroad one time in their lives and they took every advantage there was. Our international students don't deserve this, and ICE needs to be taken to court and be shut down. If putting people in cages won't shut them down, then maybe this will. So that was from one TAMIU student.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I have another one. Okay, yes. So for this one, it's by a student named. She said, as a student who has studied abroad twice, I believe that Trump's administration is ultimately suppressing our international students with mediocre justifications, which are clearly repulsive. Our international students bring an immense amount of income to our universities and colleges. Nevertheless, the most significant aspect of their presence in our nation is the fact that they enrich our college campuses by teaching us difficult perspectives and lifestyles from their countries. Plenty of us who have met these international students have created long-lasting relationships that are building bridges for a better future, where kindness, compassion, and open-mindedness are imperative to have. And that is so true.
Yeah, I really like that, and I agree.
Yeah, so the last one, also from a girl named, she said, as a US citizen, I never thought about the privileges that I had just by living in the United States. Education is a value that most people seek of obtaining in order to reach success. When I first heard about ICE's new policy and how it will deport international students if their institution will be solely online, I was in complete disbelief. In my opinion, ICE is a system created on the beliefs of ignorance and hate. It was created in order to better protect the United States from terrorists and security threats. Instead, it has turned into a deportation force and a system that violates human rights. This new policy just promotes ignorance and hate. They are removing one's ability to obtain an education. Under these rare and unforeseen times, ICE is making it harder and challenging for students to get their education. It is something that no student can control and hinders their opportunities. As a student who has been able to study abroad, I was privileged to have been able to get the opportunity to explore the world while obtaining an education. Overall, this pandemic has been extremely difficult for everyone, and these policies that are being put in place are not making it easier. International students should have the opportunity to stay and get the education that they deserve. Pretty good.
And I completely agree.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think this is just one more way of, like, you know, we are called Border Talks. And this is a way that, unfortunately, government entities are negatively affecting our community, and through policies like these. I think it, regardless of whether or not, like, you know, we are a nonpartisan group, and I think this is an issue that, regardless of if you're right-leaning or left-leaning, this is an issue that none of us want to see our international students go. You know, they're all part of our community as an international university. So I think it's really unfortunate, and I'm very glad that the Trump administration has rescinded this. And I just, again, want to reiterate that we're here and we're in solidarity and in support of our international students.
Amen.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like, those are pretty good pieces. They did a really good job.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think overall, what we've gotten from this episode is that unfortunately there's an issue that we're all outlining with one, a culture of sexual assault, or a culture that allows for sexual assault to happen, and violence against minorities and women to happen, not only in the military, of course, yes, in the military, because as we've seen with Vanessa Guillen, but also with what we've seen with the Black Lives Matter movement within police forces, and different things that we've seen with like murders from Border Patrol, and now this policy that could have potentially negatively affected our international students. And this isn't to say that we as PSA think that all of these institutions are bad or good. This is to outline the issues at hand, because ultimately, as students or as members of PSA, our main goal is to improve and create positive change within our community. And sometimes that means to do those things through these government entities, and fixing these government entities to make them accountable, as we've all spoken about, to be able to create a better, kinder world, as like a lot of those statements outlined. So I just wanted to ask you guys if you had any last comments, and thank you guys for joining us.
I'll say that although there's a lot of bad things going on in the world, it's opening up our eyes, and we're finally using our voices to create change. So I sympathize with Vanessa Guillen and her family. I hope that this never happens to any other family, any other daughter, any other like person in the world. But I feel like ultimately we are on a good path. We are trying to do better. We're trying to hold people accountable. And I think the best thing to do in memory of her is to change the system and improve it for everyone, for men and women.
Mm-hmm.
Just rest in peace to Vanessa Guillen, and just reiterating Jessica's point of holding accountable the system that failed her, so that doesn't fail women like her in the future.
Mm-hmm. And Uriel?
Well, I personally agree with Jessica, advocating for the movement and continue to fight for the laws that they're trying to build, and maybe it would help nationwide.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. I think ultimately our goal here at PSA, and for most people, is for all of us to live in a better world. And so I thank you guys for joining in this conversation and participating with us today. It was definitely a very insightful conversation, and I hope that you, our audience, enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, or if you ever want to come on an episode, feel free to reach out to us. And thanks for watching another episode of Border Talks. Hope you guys have a nice day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.